You chose to leave me. Now you're erased from this place.
So this happened 6 months ago, and I'm still processing the absolute nuclear fallout. My wife, Sarah, decided to publicly humiliate me at our family dinner in the most spectacular way possible. But she had absolutely no clue what legal landmine she was stepping on. This is probably the most expensive mistake anyone has ever made in front of witnesses, and I'm going to tell you exactly how it all went down. Background: I'm Michael Davidson, 34, heir to the Davidson family fortune. We're not new money. My great-grandfather Edmund built this empire from a small construction company after World War II. The old man came back from Europe with a Purple Heart, a Bronze Star, and a very clear understanding of how quickly everything you think is permanent can disappear. He'd seen entire family fortunes wiped out overnight, ancient bloodlines reduced to refugees with nothing but the clothes on their backs. So when Edmund got home and started building what became Davidson Industries, he made absolutely sure it would survive whatever stupidity future generations might inflict upon it. He called it bloodline insurance. Legal documents so comprehensive and bulletproof that they could protect the family from wars, depressions, market crashes, and most importantly, from family members who thought they were smarter than the system. The Davidson name comes with everything: multi-million-dollar trust funds, properties across 3 states, private healthcare networks with the best specialists in the country club memberships that money can't actually buy, charity board positions that open doors everywhere, social access that takes generations to build, and even burial plots in our family mausoleum. It's not just wealth, it's infrastructure, like plumbing or electricity. You don't notice it when it's working, but you sure as heck notice when it's not. Sarah married into this 5 years ago. She was 26, working at some nonprofit, genuinely sweet, but completely unprepared for what being Mrs. Davidson actually meant. At first, she loved everything: the shopping with unlimited budgets, the charity galas where she could play dress up, the automatic VIP treatment everywhere we went. She treated it like an extended fantasy vacation. But about 18 months ago, things started shifting. Sarah began making comments about feeling constrained by family expectations and trapped by tradition. She'd forget to wear her wedding ring, introduce herself by her maiden name at events, and complain about how stuffy and old-fashioned our family was. She started talking about wanting to find her authentic self and discover her true worth outside of being Mrs. Davidson. The red flags were everywhere, but I thought it was just a phase. People hit their 30s and start questioning everything. Totally normal. What wasn't normal was the way she started taking mysterious phone calls in other rooms, checking her phone constantly during dinner, and developing a sudden interest in personal growth and breaking free from toxic family dynamics. That's when I decided to have a conversation with Harold Whitman, our family attorney for 40 years. Harold's one of those old-school lawyers who wears 3-piece suits in summer and can recite contract law like poetry. I asked him, hypothetically, what would happen if someone decided they didn't want to be a Davidson anymore? Harold looked at me over his reading glasses with the expression of a man who'd seen every kind of family drama imaginable. Hypothetically, he said, they'd lose everything. The original clause is ironclad. Then he smiled. Not his usual polite attorney smile, but the kind of grin a chess master gets when they see checkmate coming in 3 moves. He showed me clause 19.7 of our family charter, voluntary name severance. The language was beautiful in its simplicity. Any individual who voluntarily and publicly renounces the Davidson family name shall thereby forfeit all rights, privileges, and benefits derived from said name, including but not limited to trust distributions, property access, inheritance rights, and ceremonial participation in family affairs. But Harold explained that the clause needed updating for modern legal challenges. We spent 3 months crafting the perfect language, consulting with estate specialists and family law experts, making sure every possible loophole was sealed tighter than Fort Knox. Public declaration requirement, witness verification protocols, written documentation, proof of voluntary action without coercion. We covered every angle that a clever divorce attorney might attack. The updated clause was a masterpiece. If someone voluntarily renounced the name in front of witnesses, there was no claiming coercion. If they did it publicly, there was no claiming misunderstanding. If they signed documentation, there was no claiming they didn't understand the consequences. It was legally bulletproof and designed to activate automatically once triggered. Meanwhile, Sarah had met Jake Mitchell. This guy was everything you'd expect from a tech startup bro. Perfectly styled hair, expensive casual wear that screamed, "I'm too cool for real business attire," and teeth so white they could probably be seen from orbit. He had that particular brand of arrogance that comes from making some money in tech and thinking it makes you morally superior to people who inherited their wealth. Jake had convinced Sarah that our family was toxic and holding her back from her true potential. Classic manipulation playbook. He told her she was too good for us, that she deserved better than being tied to what he called our pathetic legacy of entitled mediocrity. He was feeding her this pseudo-philosophical nonsense about choosing authenticity over expectation, real connection over inherited privilege. Sarah was eating it up like gourmet chocolate. She started posting on social media about discovering her authentic self and not letting other people's money define her worth. She was building her entire new identity around rejecting everything the Davidson name represented, and Jake was cheering her on every step of the way. The explosion happened at our monthly family dinner in November. This is a tradition going back decades. The entire extended family gathers in our formal dining room on the first Saturday of every month. 24 relatives around a mahogany table that's probably worth more than most people's houses, eating off china that belonged to my great-grandmother, with enough crystal and silverware to stock a museum. Sarah had been acting strange all week. Secret phone calls, manic energy, that look people get when they're about to detonate their entire life, but think they're being clever about it. She brought Jake as her friend, which was already crossing major lines. The guy showed up wearing what looked like a borrowed tuxedo, technically correct, but missing that indefinable quality that separates people who belong at these events from people who are just visiting. We were halfway through the main course when Sarah stood up. When Sarah stands up at a dinner party, it's like watching a peacock spread its feathers, all calculated grace and deliberate drama. She reached for her wine glass with the kind of flourish usually reserved for Broadway productions. "I have an announcement to make," she said, her voice carrying across the room like she was addressing the United Nations instead of a bunch of relatives who were probably more interested in dessert. The murmuring stopped. Forks paused midway to mouths. Even Aunt Margaret's perpetual commentary about the food died on her lips. Sarah's smile could have powered the entire eastern seaboard. "I don't want your last name anymore." The silence that followed was the kind you usually only hear in libraries or funeral homes. Thick, heavy, and loaded with the promise of upcoming disaster. But Sarah wasn't done. "My new lover says you're all a bunch of losers and I should take a real man's name instead of being tied to this pathetic legacy of entitled mediocrity." If the silence before had been thick, now it was practically solid. You could have cut it with a knife and served it as the main course. Gasps rippled across the room like waves in a disturbed pond. Some of the younger cousins let out nervous laughs, not sure if they were witnessing comedy or tragedy. Jake was practically preening against the wall, watching Eleanor deliver her speech like he was at a recital. The whole room was staring at me now, waiting for my reaction. Some looked sympathetic, others curious. A few seemed downright excited to see how this soap opera was going to unfold. But here's the thing about being publicly humiliated by someone you've shared a bed with for years. After the initial shock wears off, what you're mostly left with is profound relief, like finally pulling off a Band-Aid that's been bothering you for weeks. I didn't shout, I didn't argue, I didn't even raise my voice. Instead, I reached into my jacket pocket, pulled out the folded envelope I'd been carrying for months, and placed it calmly on the table in front of her with a pen. "Fine," I said, my voice as steady as a surgeon's hand. "Sign here." The look on Sarah's face was priceless. Pure confusion mixed with panic, like she'd been expecting fireworks and got a polite golf clap instead. She glanced at Jake, who was still smirking but with less confidence, probably wondering if this was part of some elaborate counter-performance. "What is this?" Sarah asked, but she was already reaching for the pen. Because that's the thing about Sarah. She never could resist being the center of attention, even when she didn't understand what was happening. "Exactly what you asked for," I replied. "Freedom from the Davidson name." Sarah looked at the document for maybe 3 seconds, about as long as she usually spent considering consequences, before she signed it with a flourish that would have made John Hancock proud. She was showing off for Jake, for the room, for everyone except the one person who actually mattered. Herself. The moment her pen left the paper, I knew that automated systems across our entire legal and financial network had triggered. Sarah had just voluntarily activated the most comprehensive asset forfeiture clause ever written into a family charter. The whispers started immediately, spreading across the room like wildfire. Did she really just... Is that legal? What does this mean for the trust? Someone should call Harold. But I was already standing up, already walking away from the table, from Sarah, from the whole ridiculous circus. By 6 a.m. the next morning, Sarah's entire world had evaporated. Her credit cards were canceled. Her access to family bank accounts was revoked. Her health insurance through our group policy was terminated. The trust fund that had been covering her personal expenses was frozen. The stock dividends that had been flowing to her personal account were redirected back to the family fund. Even her parking space at the country club was technically invalid because it was registered under our family membership. The panic calls to Harold started early. Sarah couldn't buy coffee because her card was declined. She couldn't access online banking. When she called the family accountant, she was told her access had been revoked. She thought it was a computer glitch until Harold explained what had actually happened. Harold told me later that Sarah had called him 6 times that first day, each call more hysterical than the last. She kept saying, I didn't know, over and over again, claiming she thought it was symbolic, that she never intended to actually give up anything real. But Harold was brutally clear. She'd voluntarily renounced the name in front of multiple witnesses, signed legal documentation, and done it all while apparently sound of mind and not under any coercion. It was what he called a hat trick in legal circles. Public declaration, witness verification, and written documentation all in one neat package. The financial stuff was just the beginning. The real artistry was watching the social infrastructure crumble. See, the Davidson family isn't just wealthy, we're connected. And those connections, it turned out, were all tied to the name Sarah had just tossed aside like yesterday's newspaper. It started small, almost imperceptibly. Lou's, the exclusive restaurant where Sarah had been a VIP for years, suddenly couldn't accommodate her usual reservations. When my assistant called an hour later requesting a table for Mr. Davidson, they had availability immediately. The spa where Sarah got weekly treatments developed a mysterious waiting list. The boutiques where she'd been a preferred customer were suddenly unable to schedule her usual appointments. These people weren't sitting around plotting Sarah's downfall. They were just responding to subtle but unmistakable signals that Sarah was no longer operating under the protection of the Davidson family umbrella. And in their world, that meant she was no longer operating under any protection at all. Sarah's charity committee positions started evaporating one by one. The Children's Hospital Board concluded her term early due to restructuring. The Literacy Foundation thanked her for her past contributions and wished her well in future endeavors. The Art Museum regretfully informed her they were streamlining their leadership structure and no longer required her services. Her personal trainer, who had been charging fees directly to our family wellness account, politely informed her she'd need to set up her own payment method. The car service she'd been using for years suddenly required a credit card on file and payment in advance. Her dermatologist's office called to say her VIP program membership had expired and would need to be renewed at full price. Each individual incident was small, manageable, the kind of thing that normally would have been handled with a phone call or a quick transfer from one of the family accounts. But taken together, they created a cascade of inconvenience, embarrassment, and growing awareness that the life Sarah had been living wasn't actually her life. It was the Davidson family's life, and she'd been living it on borrowed time. The most telling incident came when she tried to make her usual appointment at our family's private medical clinic. The Davidson family has relationships with some of the best doctors in the city, the kind of concierge medical care that money can't actually buy because it's not really for sale. It's for family. When Sarah called to schedule her routine checkup, she was politely informed that she'd need to register as a new patient and provide her own insurance information. That's when she discovered that her health coverage had been provided through our group policy, and that policy covered family members. Since she was no longer technically a family member, she was no longer technically covered. The phone call to Harold that followed was, by his description, memorable. Sarah spent 20 minutes explaining in increasingly hysterical terms that she hadn't meant to give up her health insurance when she'd rejected the Davidson name. What am I supposed to do? She'd asked Harold. I can't just not have health insurance. You could get a job, Harold had suggested. Most jobs provide health insurance. Apparently, Sarah had not found this suggestion helpful. Meanwhile, Jake was turning their relationship into social media content, completely oblivious to what was actually happening. His Instagram became a shrine to what he apparently considered his greatest conquest. Posts about choosing love over legacy and authenticity over inherited privilege. Videos about Sarah's courage in rejecting toxic family dynamics. Real love means choosing the person, not the name, read one post featuring them at some trendy restaurant. When you find someone brave enough to leave everything behind for authentic connection, you know you found something special. The guy was so busy celebrating his victory that he was documenting Sarah's legal self-destruction one Instagram post at a time. Every post, every video, every carefully crafted caption was evidence that Sarah hadn't been coerced or manipulated. She'd done it willingly, enthusiastically, publicly, and with his full support and encouragement. But Jake started getting nervous when his own social standing began suffering. Tech world contacts began distancing themselves because associating with messy family drama looked unprofessional. His venture capital networking opportunities dried up. The private investment opportunities that had been flowing his way slowed to a trickle. Jake tried throwing his own events, hosting dinners and parties designed to create his own social network with Sarah at the center. But building a social circle from scratch is like trying to create an ecosystem in a petri dish. It requires more than just resources and good intentions. 2 months after the dinner, our annual charity gala rolled around. The Ashford Hotel ballroom was its usual spectacular self. Crystal chandeliers, flower arrangements that cost more than most people's cars, enough black tie sophistication to make a James Bond movie look casual. Sarah showed up fashionably late with Jake as her date, probably thinking she could still access that world. She was wearing a dress that looked like it had been assembled by someone who'd learned about formal wear from Google image searches. Technically correct, but missing some indefinable quality. I watched them work the room for about 20 minutes, noting how conversations seemed to end just a little too quickly, how groups had a tendency to disperse shortly after Sarah and Jake joined them. It wasn't obvious rejection. These people were far too well bred for anything that crude. It was more like social friction, polite resistance that meant you were welcome to be here, but you weren't really welcome to stay. That's when James Morrison, our family's legal representative for formal occasions, approached Sarah with the kind of purposeful stride that meant business was about to be conducted. James was one of those lawyers who looked like he'd been born wearing a three-piece suit, the kind of man who could deliver devastating news with the same pleasant expression he'd used to comment on the weather. The envelope he carried was cream-colored heavy stock with the Davidson family crest embossed in gold. It looked expensive, official, and ominous. Exactly the kind of document that makes smart people very nervous. Sarah accepted it with a smile, probably thinking it was some kind of invitation or acknowledgement. Maybe even an olive branch from me. The ballroom's ambient noise level seemed to drop by half as Sarah opened the envelope and began reading its contents. The document was comprehensive, professionally prepared, and absolutely devastating. Property access rights revoked, inheritance claims severed, trust fund distributions terminated, family foundation board position eliminated, healthcare coverage discontinued, even burial rights in the Davidson family mausoleum officially forfeited. Sarah's face went through more color changes than a mood ring in a fever dream. Jake was clearly trying to figure out whether he should comfort her, defend her, or just pretend he didn't know her. The man looked like he was calculating the social cost of his association with Sarah in real time. The whispers started immediately. "Did you see what she just received? Is that what I think it is? My God, they've actually cut her off completely." Some of Sarah's former friends took a step back, literally and figuratively, distancing themselves from someone who had just been publicly declared persona non grata. Jake tried to rally, putting his arm around Sarah's shoulders and saying something that was probably meant to be supportive, but came out sounding defensive. He was discovering in real time that being someone's romantic savior was a lot more complicated when that someone had just been formally exiled from the social circle you were trying to join. They left early, which was probably the smartest decision Sarah had made in months. The charity auction continued around their departure, as if nothing had happened. The show must go on, and Sarah's personal crisis was just background noise to an event that had bigger things to worry about. Over the following weeks, the reports kept coming in through our housekeeper, Mrs. Patterson, who had a remarkable talent for gathering information without appearing to be gathering information. Sarah had tried to return to our mansion, probably looking for clothes or jewelry. She'd tried her access codes at the main gate, but they'd been deactivated. She'd tried the service entrance with the same result. Finally, she'd gotten out of her car and walked the perimeter looking for some other way in. That's when Mrs. Henderson from next door had gotten involved, one of those neighbors who monitors everyone else's business. She'd approached Sarah at the gate with fake concern. "Eleanor, dear, are you locked out? That's so unfortunate. Adrian moved most of your belongings into storage last week. He mentioned something about respecting privacy during difficult transitions. Sarah's reaction progressed through the 5 stages of grief in about 30 seconds. Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and finally resignation as she got back in her Mercedes and drove away. Meanwhile, Sarah tried to organize her own charity event, a literacy fundraiser she'd been planning for months before her life imploded. She'd assumed that her contacts, her reputation, and her organizational skills would be enough to pull together a successful gala even without the official backing of the Davidson family name. She was wrong. The venue discovered scheduling conflicts. The caterer found capacity limitations. The auction house decided to focus on established organizations with proven track records. Most painfully, the donors who had been reliable supporters were nowhere to be found. Sarah was forced to cancel 3 weeks before the event, sending out embarrassed notifications to the handful of people who had actually committed. 3 months after the dinner, Sarah tracked me down at the Riverside Botanical Reserve, where I volunteer every Thursday afternoon. I'd been going there for 5 years, ever since I'd realized that having too much money and not enough purpose was a recipe for existential boredom. The reserve was my antidote to irrelevance. 2 hours of actual work with my actual hands, pruning roses and maintaining flower beds like some kind of millionaire groundskeeper. There was something deeply satisfying about that level of straightforward cause and effect, especially after spending most of my professional life navigating Byzantine complexities of family business. I was working on a climbing rose that had developed a fungal infection when I heard hesitant footsteps on the gravel path. I didn't turn around immediately. The reserve attracted all kinds of visitors, and I'd learned to tune out casual foot traffic. Michael. Sarah's voice was smaller than I remembered, less certain, stripped of the performative confidence she'd been wearing like armor for months. I continued working on the rose, carefully removing affected leaves and disposing of them in my waste bag. Fungal infections spread quickly if you weren't diligent about containment. Michael, please. I know you can hear me. I finished examining the branch I was working on, made one more careful cut, then finally turned to face her. Sarah looked like she'd been living in her car for a week. Her usually perfect hair was in a messy ponytail. Her makeup was either non-existent or applied by someone who'd forgotten how to use a mirror, and she was wearing clothes that looked suspiciously like they came from stores where normal people shopped. Sarah, I said, acknowledging her presence with about as much enthusiasm as I'd show for a parking ticket. This is unexpected. I've been looking for you, she said. You don't answer your phone. Your office won't take my calls. The house. She trailed off, probably remembering her recent adventure with the gate codes. I've been busy, I said, which was true. Between running Davidson Industries and maintaining my sanity after my wife's very public nervous breakdown, I'd had plenty to occupy my time. Sarah stepped closer, and I could see that she'd been crying recently. Not elegant movie tears, but the red-eyed, puffy-faced kind that happens when reality introduces itself with a baseball bat. Michael, I need to talk to you about what happened, about what I did. I turned back to the roses, partly because they needed attention, and partly because looking at Sarah was like looking at a car accident. I'm listening, I said, though I kept working while she talked. I didn't think it would mean all this, Sarah said, her voice carrying desperate sincerity. When I signed that paper, I thought it was just symbolic, like a gesture. I didn't realize it would actually change anything. I found a particularly diseased section of stem and cut it cleanly. What did you think it would change? Nothing, Sarah said, her voice rising with panic. I thought it would make a point. I thought it would show everyone that I was strong enough to choose my own path. I thought you'd try to stop me. Why would I try to stop you from getting exactly what you wanted? Because you loved me, Sarah said, something almost accusatory in her tone, like my failure to fight for our marriage was somehow my fault. I did love you, I said calmly. Past tense, but love doesn't mean ignoring reality. And the reality is that you chose Jake over me. You chose his vision of your future over our shared past. It wasn't supposed to be permanent, Sarah said, definitely crying now. It was supposed to be a wake-up call, a way to get your attention, a way to make you realize you were taking me for granted. I stopped working and looked at her directly. Sarah, I never took you for granted. I took you seriously. When you said you wanted out, I believed you meant it. But I didn't mean all of it, she said, gesturing vaguely at what I assumed was her current life situation. I didn't mean the money and the house and the health insurance and all the infrastructure. I just meant the emotional stuff, the marriage stuff. The emotional stuff and the infrastructure were the same thing, I explained patiently. They weren't separate systems, Sarah. They were all part of being married to me, being part of the Davidson family. You can't keep the benefits while rejecting the foundation they're built on. Sarah was quiet, probably trying to process the concept that actions have consequences and contracts mean what they say rather than what you hope they might mean in retrospect. I can fix this, she said finally, with desperate optimism. Legally, I can reverse it. I can reclaim the name. I can sign whatever documents you want. It's not about paper, Sarah. It's not about legal documents or signatures or what you can or can't reverse. Then what is it about? It's about meaning, I said simply. And what you meant was loud and clear. You meant that the Davidson name wasn't worth keeping. You meant that our marriage wasn't worth preserving. You meant that Jake's opinion was more important than mine. But I was wrong, Sarah said, her voice breaking completely. I was stupid and selfish and wrong about everything. Maybe, I agreed. But being wrong doesn't undo the consequences of being wrong. It just means you've learned something. I gathered my tools and prepared to move on to the next section of the garden. Sarah was still standing there, looking lost and desperate among the carefully maintained beauty of the botanical reserve. Michael, please, she said one more time. There has to be something, some way to fix this. I looked at her one last time. This woman who had shared my bed and my life and my name for years, who had thrown it all away for a tech bro with expensive teeth and a limited understanding of consequences. The roses here require constant care, I said. Attention, patience, the right conditions. When they're healthy, they're beautiful. But when they get diseased, when they start affecting other plants around them, sometimes the only way to save the garden is to remove the infected parts. I walked away, leaving Sarah standing among the roses, finally understanding that some things, once cut away, couldn't be grafted back on. Jake dumped her 2 weeks later when the novelty wore off, and the bills started mounting. Word through our social network was that Sarah was working retail now, living in a studio apartment, dealing with health insurance paperwork and credit applications like a regular person. She kept trying to contact me through mutual friends, but I'd moved on. The Davidson Family Board met the following month and established the Davidson Heritage Endowment, a $10 million scholarship and mentorship program designed to support people who actually honor and maintain the Davidson name and values. It created incentives for people to earn their association with our family rather than take it for granted. Sarah's entry in our family records now carries an asterisk, noting her voluntary renunciation of all rights and privileges. She became exactly what Harold and I had designed her to become. A cautionary tale, a reminder that the Davidson name comes with both privileges and responsibilities, and people who want the privileges without the responsibilities end up with neither. Sometimes the best revenge is just stepping back and letting someone experience the full consequences of their choices. Sarah wanted freedom from the Davidson name, and she got it. She just didn't realize that freedom meant standing alone in the cold, discovering who she really was when she wasn't Mrs. Davidson. The family name endures. Our legacy continues. And I learned the difference between being married to someone and being committed to something larger than yourself. Sarah taught me that lesson, though probably not the way she intended. Actions have consequences, names have meaning, and some choices can't be undone. She got exactly what she deserved, exactly what she asked for.